5.6 talks about sex determination and sex-linked traits. When it comes to those chromosomes that we have, remember we have how many pairs? Okay, what's the name of this website where you can send in, I think it's your spit, and they will figure out what your what your ancestry is.
I think it's called Ancestry DNA.
Yeah, there's that one. There's also, have you ever heard this one called 23andMe? Where you can find out where your ancestors came from. And sometimes you're just surprised where some of your ancestors, where your ancestors were from. You know, they may be married, you know, I typically am of German background, but I'm sure when we find out that I have somewhere back there was somebody from England, brought their genes into our family gene pool, and some were from, which we kind of knew, were probably from Holland, you know, and my wife would have some from Poland, because her mother's last name was a Swatsky, with a ski on the end of it, you know, well, there's probably from Poland. Okay, so the number of chromosomes is 23. We have 22 of those in humans that control almost all your body characteristics, let's say it that way. They don't determine what sex you are. So, in other words, those 22, if we put them in a female, it would produce the same characteristics they would in a male. So they're not distinguished by that. The only way they might be modified is with male and female hormones when you go through puberty, you know, that might affect it some. But the rest of them are, you know, the same. Now, when it comes to sex chromosomes, there's only two kinds. There's an X and a Y. The X is a normal size chromosome, and the Y is a little shorty, okay, little tiny, and it actually looks kind of Y-ish. And there's not a lot of genes on that chromosome. Not a lot of genes on that chromosome. Can you close the door, please? No, we don't. Okay. Okay, so if you are a female, you have two X's, and if you are a male, you have an X and a Y. So if we take that concept of determining sex, okay, so I'm going to erase a little bit of this from the previous period. So if you are a guy, you have an X and a Y. If you're a girl, you have two X's. Now I realize we kind of live in a society, in our country anyway, where, you know, the idea that what you are is what you think you are. Okay? Well, that really doesn't bear itself out in science at all. You know, you know, if I'm I can think I'm a truck, but I'm not a truck. You know. So, but this is what determines who you really are. Now, can there be other things that influence how I feel about myself? Yes. You know, but that still doesn't change who you are. So, if you were, if we had mom and dad, and we're going to put mom, let's say up here, mom's genes or chromosomes segregate. Remember we had the concept of segregation. One goes to one sex cell, one goes to the other. So they're going to go to separate columns. And here's dad, let's say. And so will his X and Y separate to different sex cells? Well, if this X from this sperm, or egg, combines with this X from that sperm, I'm going to have this. So this offspring, this child is going to look like a female, right? What about this one down here? going to be the X from mom and the Y from dad. Going to be a male, right? And the same thing over here. So, when it comes to the topic of how many, what are the likelihood of you having a boy or a girl, according to this, it's what? 50-50, right? Now, that doesn't totally explain why you can have, like my brother had 3 boys. His oldest son has only girls. He has 4 girls. His brother, so far, has 3 boys, 3 little ones, and they're expecting the next one, I think, in a month or 2. And they have chosen, even though we have that information available, they've chosen not to know. Just when he or she pops out, this is what we get. They don't want to know beforehand. My son, on the other hand, who's a computer engineer, says, why would you want to waste that kind of technology? We want to know as soon as possible. Two different points of view of how you do that. But here's a really good question. Who was the famous king in Egypt, in England, that kept getting rid of his wives because he wasn't getting any boys? Who was the king? Remember him? I think it's Henry VIII. Well, who determines what sex the child is going to be? The guy does. Okay? The guy determines what sex. Instead of him changing wives, the queen, should have been changing husbands. Maybe that would have changed to have, but then it wouldn't have been an heir. So that's a problem. So but there are other factors that determine it, obviously, why some families can have way more of one sex than another. In my dad's first church that he pastored in Montana was a family that they had 8 girls before they had the first boy. Kept trying. They were farmers, so they wanted a boy to help farming. Well, the girls became very good farmers, because that's all there were. Okay, so do you understand the sex chromosome thing, right? So here's what I just demonstrated over there. Now, when we talk about sex-linked traits, we're talking about a trait that's carried on the X chromosome. There is nothing on the Y chromosome that matches up with something on the X. So if we would take the X chromosome and go down the whole list of all the genes that it has, there's nothing on the Y that has those same ones. Okay? So Y is just kind of like a whole unique set. So if you are a guy, whatever you have on your X is going to show. Whether it's dominant or recessive is going to show. There's nothing on the Y to cover it up. So we call those sex-linked traits because they're carried on the X chromosome. Not on the other 22, but only on the X chromosome. So one of those is an example of hemophilia. And you have that pedigree in your book about the human pedigree for a royal family, that how the hemophilia gene got passed along. But it's carried on the X chromosome. We typically write whatever the characteristics that, whatever the characteristic we use, we usually write it as the first letter as a superscript in there to indicate that that X chromosome is carrying that particular trait. Okay, what was that all about? Good question. Okay, well, so it looks like I don't have any more slides on that one. Okay, so let's take something like color blindness. So color blindness is only carried on the X. And so if a male would have the color blindness gene on the X, there's nothing on the Y to cover it up. So this guy is going to be colorblind. But if the female has that and then has the one for normal vision, the normal vision is dominant and will cover it up. So the female, even though she has a gene for color blindness, won't be colorblind. But she will be carrying the gene for color blindness. We call her a carrier. She can pass it on to her children, possibly. You know, we don't know which X's she's going to be passing on to you, for instance. So for a woman to be colorblind, what would have to be true? That's the only way that she can be colorblind. She has to have both genes for color blindness. Oh, these are supposed to be little letters here. Both genes for color blindness, and then she's colorblind. So, do you know of any colorblind females? No, I don't know of any. I know that that's possible. I remember, I don't know if that was when I was in college I heard about it, but there was this family where dad was colorblind and mom was colorblind. So when they have children, are the daughters going to be colorblind? Okay. So the daughter gets her X from dad, and the other X from mom, right? So this daughter was colorblind. This son was colorblind. This daughter was colorblind. And this son was colorblind. So if mom and dad are both colorblind, the kids can't be anything but colorblind. Okay? Now, so here's mom and dad raising their kids, teaching the little ones about color, and it's their own idea of color. They can't see the colors properly. So when the kids go to school and everybody else around them knows their colors, they're not seeing the colors exactly the same way. So it was really confusing for them at first to realize that blue maybe wasn't really blue. You know, maybe they were calling it the wrong color. You know, so that's there are actually three kinds of color blindness. There's one of them is red-green, which is most common. My son has that. And if you were a young adult male living on your own, how could you dress so that you kind of look color-wise put together? Everything goes with what?
Black.
Black would be one possibility, or
White.
Or wear jeans. That's what. So he always wore jeans to church, to whatever it is. Always wore jeans. Why? Because any color goes with jeans, he was told.
Can I have Kate Miller?
keep taking her. You like her, okay. Well, you can't keep her though. What some solutions to that is, can you think about red, green? First of all, is there problems with that? Think about driving. Come to a stoplight. Now, what have we done to make it easier for them? Yeah,
We keep the red on top. And
the red is always on the top. Now, there are places where the stoplights are sideways, right? What color is always on the left? It's red. Now, you and I don't care about that because we can see our colors. But to them, it's important that they know where to look for red and where to look for green to be safe. We don't want them driving out of the intersection when they thought it was green when it's really red. That's not a good idea. Want to poke Sleepy? I guess does it work? Yeah, it does. Okay, we're ready. Now, another kind of color blind is kind of like sort of like complementary colors of that. It's called blue and yellow. It's not as common as red and green. Here's what we mean by colorblind. For a person who's red-green colorblind, is if they saw something red and something blue that had, let's say, the same brightness, they couldn't tell the difference between them. They look the same to them. I don't know what they're seeing, but I just know that they're not seeing. They just can't distinguish between the two. And same thing with blue, yellow. If something's blue, the same brightness as it is in yellow, to them it looks the same. They don't know which one's which. I don't know what they're seeing again. But there is a third one, which is probably the rarest kind of color blindness, and that's totally colorblind. The receptors for color in their eye don't function. I think they're there, they just don't function. It's like going around your whole life in black and white. It's not that you started out with color and then it went bad and you turned into black and white. It's just that's all you've ever seen. You don't know the difference. So when people start talking about color, it makes no sense to them. One time you look at it and they call it red. Next time you're looking at it and last time you call that red. No, this time it's blue. That'd be really confusing to people like that. Now, one of the things I have seen recently, some of you probably saw that maybe on the internet, where there are some special glasses that they have developed that can help people who are colorblind, but I think it works for, they have to make it different for red, green than for blue, yellow, but where that helps them distinguish between the two. And I remember reading, I wanted to remember how it worked. It made sense what they were doing to be able to distinguish like a red from a green if you had them on. Now it doesn't fix your color blind, it just helps you distinguish. Take the glasses off and you're back the way you were. Okay, so that's how a sex-linked trait works. Now, let's just modify this let's just make Mom a carrier. She's got normal vision and Dad is colorblind. What happens there? Well, one of these would have to be a capital C. So this girl would have what kind of vision? She has a capital C. She has normal vision. Covers up the color blindness. This comes from up here, so this boy will have normal vision. Over here, this girl would be colorblind, and this guy would be colorblind. So in other words, out of their kids, they could have some of the girls are colorblind, some aren't. Some of the guys are colorblind, some aren't. You know, in that combination. So, if in a sex-like trait, the females can either be normal for that, but that could be one of two possibilities. They're only a carrier and don't possess, or they still possess the normal dominant gene, or they, so you know, they're totally normal, carrier, or they exhibit the trait. So that's for girls. For guys, it's either one or the other. They either exhibit it or they don't exhibit it. There's no carrier thing with that. Well, yeah, but we don't call them carriers. They are carrying the gene, but we don't call them carriers because we only call them carriers if you can't see the trait expressed. They just possess that gene.